You don't keep choosing the wrong men because you have bad taste. You keep choosing them because something in you recognizes them. And that recognition, that immediate sense of familiarity, that feeling of, I know this person before you even know their name, is not chemistry. It is memory. It is your nervous system saying, this is what love felt like before you knew love could feel different. The painful part is not that you fall for them. The painful part is how quickly it feels like home, how comfortable the discomfort feels, how the push and pull doesn't read as a warning, it reads as passion. You have been mistaking the echo of an old wound for the sound of connection. And what you are about to hear is not a diagnosis. It is the moment you stop calling it fate and start seeing it for exactly what it is. Most people believe attraction is instinctive, that when you feel drawn to someone powerfully, something inside you, some ancient animal wisdom, is pointing you toward a good thing. They believe that magnetic pull is nature's way of saying, this one matters. But psychology tells a different and far less romantic story. One that is more important than any relationship advice you have ever been given. What you call attraction is often just pattern recognition in disguise. Your brain is not scanning for safety, for compatibility, or for love in its truest form. It is scanning for familiarity. And familiarity was built not from your best experiences, but from your first ones. The earliest imprints of what love looked like, often shaped by a parent, a caregiver, or a first relationship that broke something open in you. Those become the template your unconscious mind carries forward into every new connection you make. The problem is not that the template exists. Every person has one. The problem is when the template was shaped by inconsistency, by emotional unavailability, or by love that only showed up halfway. Because now, your nervous system has learned to associate love with uncertainty. And certainty, offered by a man who is fully present, emotionally stable, and genuinely invested, can feel foreign, flat, almost untrustworthy. Not because you want pain, but because your system has never learned that safety can feel like passion too. That peace can coexist with depth. That love without the chase is still love. It just requires an entirely different kind of readiness. And this is where it gets darker. The first thing to understand is what psychologists call trauma bonding. Not in the dramatic, clinical sense, but in the quiet, everyday version that most people never recognize inside themselves. When you experience inconsistency from someone you love early in life, moments of warmth followed by emotional withdrawal, affection that felt conditional, connection that you had to earn again and again, your brain creates a specific kind of attachment map. It learns that love is something you pursue, that closeness is something you work toward, not something you simply receive. So when you meet a man who gives you just enough to keep you reaching, who is warm one week and emotionally distant the next, who makes you feel deeply seen and then retreats without explanation, your brain doesn't register that as a red flag. It registers that as familiar. And to the nervous system, familiar and safe feel like the same signal, even when nothing about the situation is actually safe at all. The second layer is even more personal and more uncomfortable to sit with honestly. You are not drawn to these men randomly. You are drawn to them because there is an unresolved question living inside the original wound. And somewhere beneath conscious awareness, you believe this new relationship might finally give you the answer you have been waiting for. If a parent was emotionally unavailable, you may spend years choosing partners who are emotionally unavailable too. Not because you enjoy the pain, but because some part of you is still trying to win that original love. Still trying to prove that if you are patient enough, understanding enough, giving enough, this time, the person will stay. This time, the love will be consistent. This time, you will finally feel like you were enough, just as you were. But the wound cannot be healed by someone who carries the same wound. That is not healing. That is repetition with a different face. And here is what nobody talks about. There are specific signals that trigger this pull. And once you see them, you will recognize them everywhere. It is the man who is charming but slightly hard to read. The one whose interest comes in waves, intense attention followed by sudden unavailability. The one who makes you feel electric in his presence and slightly unsettled in his absence. That unsettledness is not passion. Psychologists describe it as the activation of a dopamine reward loop, the same neurological mechanism behind any behavior that is only sometimes rewarded. When someone is unpredictable, the brain does not quiet down. It locks in. It becomes hypervigilant to every signal, every shift, every sign of whether the closeness is coming or not. This is why the anxious, uncertain feeling that comes with emotional unavailability is so easily mistaken for intensity. Because neurologically, they feel almost identical. The body cannot tell the difference between the thrill of love and the anxiety of not being sure if love is coming at all. That confusion is not weakness, it is biology. But biology can be understood, and understanding it is what begins to loosen its grip. The moment when something genuinely different arrives, when a man shows up consistently, when he is emotionally present, when there is no push and pull to navigate, that moment can feel almost wrong, like something is missing. Like the relationship lacks intensity because it lacks the familiar tension. And that discomfort is not a sign that he is the wrong person. It is a sign of how deeply the old pattern is embedded. Because your nervous system never learned to relax inside love. It only learned to chase it. And when the chase stops, the emotional brain doesn't know what to do with the stillness. So it creates doubt where there is no real reason for doubt. It manufactures distance. It begins looking, almost unconsciously, for an exit. Not because the relationship is bad, but because peace does not yet feel like what love is supposed to feel like. And that gap, between what is good for you and what feels exciting to you, is where the pattern does most of its quiet damage. This is the part no one explains when they tell you to simply choose better. They say, know your worth. They say, stop settling for less than you deserve. And those words are not wrong, but they are incomplete. Because they do not account for the fact that the man who offers more, who is stable, emotionally available, and genuinely present, can feel like the wrong fit even when he is exactly right. This is not a willpower problem. It is not a self-esteem problem in its simplest form. It is a pattern recognition problem. And patterns do not shift because you decide they should. They shift when you become conscious of them at a level deep enough to interrupt the automatic response, before it has already become another relationship you are surviving instead of choosing. Here is a question worth sitting with honestly. Think of the last time you felt that immediate, powerful pull towards someone, before you knew much about them, before you had any real evidence of who they were. Now ask yourself, what did they remind you of? Not on the surface, not in how they looked or what they said, but in the feeling they produced in you, in the way uncertainty around them made you want to try harder, in the way their warmth felt like something you had to stay close enough to catch. You do not have to answer out loud, but if something shifted just now, if some quiet part of you just recognized exactly what was described, do not dismiss that. That recognition is not something to analyze away. It is the beginning of the only change that is actually possible from here. But the deeper reason is far more unsettling. And this is the layer most conversations about this pattern never reach. The wound you keep choosing men to reflect is not only a wound about love, it is a wound about identity. Specifically, about what you unconsciously believe you are allowed to receive without having to earn it. When love in its earliest form was inconsistent, conditional, or withheld, the child inside that experience drew a conclusion. Not a conscious one, but one that settled deep. The conclusion that love is something you work for. That being loved simply for existing, without adjusting, without shrinking, without proving your worth in the silence between their warmth, is not quite something you are automatically allowed to have. And that belief, buried beneath years of adult life and adult language, shapes everything. It shapes who you notice first when you walk into a room. It shapes whose attention feels meaningful and whose feels unearned. It shapes the story you tell yourself about why stable men feel boring and complicated men feel like electricity. And this next part is the one that changes everything. The pattern is not your fault. It was constructed before you had the consciousness to question it, before you had language for what was happening, before you even knew that what you were experiencing was building a template you would carry forward for years. But it is your responsibility to see it now, because you are no longer in the original situation. You are not the child waiting for the love to become steady. You are an adult with the capacity to interrupt the loop, not by forcing yourself to feel attraction for someone unfamiliar, but by slowly, with patience and real compassion for yourself, teaching your nervous system that it is allowed to receive love that does not require a performance. The men who mirror the wound will always feel familiar, and the men who offer something different will feel like learning a language you were never taught. But languages can be learned, and what becomes familiar can always change. What you carry into every room, into every first conversation, into every relationship you begin, is not your failure to choose correctly. It is the unexamined story of what love taught you it was, long before you had any say in the lesson. And the only way that story changes is not by deciding harder or wanting differently. It is by becoming conscious of the architecture beneath the choice, by learning to pause inside the pull and ask, is this real connection, or is this just the wound mistaking itself for instinct? You can reach a place where the familiar no longer means the painful, where what feels like home is also what is genuinely good for you. That is not a distant ideal. That is what healing actually looks like in practice. Not a single dramatic moment, but a slow, quiet recalibration of what your nervous system will accept as love. One recognition at a time, one honest pause at a time. But there is another layer beneath this. What happens inside you the moment you finally stop moving toward the wound, and the silence that follows that decision. What that stillness reveals about who you actually are when you are no longer performing for love. That story begins somewhere else. Have you ever felt yourself move toward someone you somehow already knew was going to cost you something, and gone anyway? Tell me what kept you there. Drop it in the comments. I genuinely want to know.